Yeah, I mean, clearly, like, they misunderstood the assignment, right? Like clearly, right? I mean, they didn't listen to Canadians. They didn't understand why people were so mad. They were just trying to avoid a bad press day. And look, I think you're completely right. I mean, the solution for taxpayers and honestly for the CBC is to take their taxpayer subsidy away completely. You're listening to the Canadian Taxpayers Podcast. I'm Franco Terrazzano, your federal director here in Mordor. Oops. I mean, Ottawa. And of course, we're always fighting for lower taxes, less waste, and more accountable government. Now, I've got my friend and great colleague, Chris Sim. She's our Alberta director. But, you know, she's on the show today because she also was a journalist covering Parliament here for about a decade, a little bit more. And, you know, even for a quick minute, she worked at the CBC. Well, we'll forgive you for that one, Chris. You know, everyone makes some mistakes in their life, so it won't hold that against you. But Chris, the reason I want you on the show today is I just want to read a record that we got from the CBC. Okay, so we filed this access to information request. We got 65 pages back detailing all of CBC's employees who are making over $100,000 a year. And let me just tell you, folks, the bureaucratic bloat at the CBC is all too real. So, Chris, as a tax fighter and as a former journalist, I'm just going to read you some of the positions the CBC has, and I want you to react to it, okay? Okay. So the CBC's own records show that they have 180 managers, 277 senior managers, 106 senior directors, 124 directors, 28 executive directors, 493 producers, 36 technical producers, 168 senior producers, 86 executive producers. Then on top of all of that, 130 advisors, 81 analysts, 120 hosts, 80 project leads, 30 lead architects, 25 supervisors, among many other bureaucrats that are also paid more than $100,000. Go ahead, wow. Chris.
Wow. Okay. So again, in my defense, as Jonathan Kay said when he ghost wrote somebody's book, what is it? I was young and I needed money. Yes. So I did work at CBC for about 6 weeks. And I also worked in like mainstream media, Parliament Hill, Parliamentary Press Gallery. So in big newsrooms. I figured this was going to be a big list because you were mentioning that you guys were doing a deep dive, finding access to information records and all that good stuff. I was expecting it to be big. This is more than double what I was expecting. This is astonishing. The old anecdote goes that for every normal journalist, and back in the day when none of them used to be funded by the government except for CBC, the old story went, okay, for every one reporter that was slaving away in a private newsroom, there were about 4 other journalists working over at the CBC and like 12 managers circling around them. This shows this is true. It's true. The staggering amount of bloat in middle management here, it explains a lot. It explains a few things. A, it explains why it's costing us so much money, okay? It also explains why quite often the CBC is getting really low ratings, even compared to other Canadian news broadcasters, because you have that thick of middle management in between the reporters who are actually out in the field and the person who's talking on TV, that gums up the works. So it's pretty surprising that there's that many people.
Yeah, and like, okay, so, you know, I was going on air, you know, with a bunch of other radio hosts across Canada and like talking to them about this release package, and they were flabbergasted. Yeah. Right. And like Chris, you and I, we've both done radio on CBC, and, you know, you'll like talk to like 2 or 3 different producers before you ever even talk to the host. Like, so when I see these numbers where you have hundreds of managers, directors, producers, more than 100 advisors, almost 100 analysts, all making $100,000. I mean, like 2 things come to mind. Number one, it's like you got a full a circus tent full of bureaucrats for every one acrobat. And the second thing that comes to mind, you know, is like, this is pretty much exactly how you would expect a news station to run if it were operated by the government.
I'm sorry, that's so simple, but it's so true. And I've never quite put it that way. Yeah, that's exactly what it's like. And to give people an idea of what a manager does, okay, like in a normal newsroom, okay, back in the day when they used to actually have more than one reporter who was run off his or her feed, you'd have like 4 reporters, you know, you'd have like 1 news anchor, you might have a sportscaster, and then you'd have 1 news manager who was sitting there like, in a Spider-Man comic or something, right? Or a Superman comic behind their desk. And they're the ones saying where to go and what to do and what time. And then above him, there might be some mucky muck that deals with both radio and TV. How many managers is that? 2. For what? An entire newsroom. But no, the CBC has got what? Over 400 managers? Is that the stat we've got there? More than 700 producers? Like, it is just gross. And keep in mind, guys, this is just the list that's paid over $100,000 a year.
Yeah. And hey, we got another list too, right? So we got separate access to information requests that showed the number of CBC staffers who take a 6-figure salary and how that has increased over the years. So let me just break that down for our audience, right? So there are now 1,831 CBC staffers with a 6-figure salary. So 1,800 CBC staffers with a 6-figure salary alone, right? Not other types of perks or pensions or anything like that. 1,800 with a 6-figure salary. Okay. So those salaries cost taxpayers about $240 million bucks. If you go back to 2015, which is the first year we have records for, it was a little bit more than 400. Okay. So from a little bit more than 400 all the way up to 1,800. I mean, that's more than a 300% increase in the number of CBC staffers with a 6-figure salary. Okay. And like, is there any...
Franco, is that tripling or quadrupling?
Quadrupling. And like, I heard a couple things that I just want to address, right? Because I've heard some people say, well, 6 figures now isn't what it used to be. Thanks a lot, government, for all the inflation that you created. And like, okay, fair enough. But what the records really show is not just the amount of money people are getting paid, which is obviously an issue, but just the layers and layers of bureaucracy, right? You look at these records with all the different bureaucrats at the CBC, a couple things come to mind. Number one, yeah, the CBC has a lot of fat to cut, right? Mm-hmm. So even if you're a fan of the CBC, when you're hearing these numbers, right, you should be like, why is there so much bureaucratic bloat and why is it costing me so much, right? Why do we have a bunch of managers managing managers at the CBC? Okay, but also, right, we know the Carney government, we've heard Carney and, the Liberal MPs, they're not for defunding the CBC. Okay, that's what they've said publicly many times. But as they launch this spending review, clearly the CBC's own records show that there is a massive amount of bloat there to cut.
Yeah, they can just grab the chainsaw. And I'm just going to tell some tales out of school here because I think it's important to understand what it's like there. And this was even back in 2012, like meeting after meeting after meeting after meeting. Like, for example, I came over from a very, private broadcaster from CTV back in the day. I was one of their main producers for the 5 o'clock political show. There were 2 producers, 2 for the CTV 5 o'clock political show. I hopped over to CBC for a little bit. There were 12 of them sitting over there. Same show, same length of time, same bat channel, okay? It was enormous. And those were just the producers. And then on a step above us, literally, they were up on this raised dais in the middle of the newsroom, were all of the managers, Franco. And they were just thick with them. It was unbelievable. Like, the culture at the CBC was so strange. Like, they used to offer podcast, like videocast yoga sessions to your desk.
What?
I'm not kidding. Okay. There is a thing where you logged in. And again, straight up, people were nice to me there. This is not a personal thing. It was just an observational thing. Like, they had all this stuff going on there. So yeah, needless to say, there's a lot of fat there to cut. And one other thing, I remember distinctly when former Prime Minister Stephen Harper went through all of the departments. He didn't care which one it was and said, listen, please find, I think it was around 8% savings. 8, single digit, okay? The CBC thrashed and screamed and freaked out. Instead of cutting their already moribund, obese level of middle management, what did they do? They shut down this tiny little radio show. It was an international radio show that would have cost them peanuts to produce because it was all people phoning in on cell phones from around the world. It was called Dispatches. So they slaughtered that one publicly, saying, look at what you made us do. Instead of actually going after, what did you say, the managers and producers and analysts and advisors? Like, there are no advisors in a private newsroom, okay? There are not advisors who wander around in sandals advising you on everything from like the wartime to DEI. But there's advisors at the CBC, how like more than 30 of them? Like that's
no. Hold
Let's
on a sec. No, 130 advisors, Chris. But hey, Chris, let me piggyback up on that, right? Because this is going to be a real thing that happens as the Carney government talks about this new spending review, right? And it's really the oldest playbook or the oldest page in the playbook, right, for government is like whenever there's any pressure for them to find some savings, what's the first thing that like any department across history, time, place within government does? They find the one thing that the public actually cares about and they cut that. Right. And it's their tactic. It's a tactic that the government uses because they'll cut like the one thing that the public actually wants as a way to be like, see, folks, like you can't cut any spending or you won't get this one service. But like that's BS. And what these records show is that there's so much fat that the CBC could cut. There's so much fat for that the government could cut that nobody would even notice. Right. Like just gone. And like, is there any wonder? Because I guarantee you this level of bloat, this level of over management is happening across the government, across government departments, across government crown corporations. Right. So like if this is just one crown corporation that's this bloated, I bet you it's a good bet that there's many other ones with just as much bloat as the CBC. Now, Chris, I want to pivot ever so slightly, okay? So we're going to stick with the CBC gravy train, but I want to talk about the bonuses and the pay raises because you'll remember just before Christmas, December 2023, the CBC announced it was going to lay off hundreds of employees, but still hand out the bonuses and then run around, cry, pour, and beg the government for more taxpayer cash. Well, something that I have never seen before, Chris, maybe you saw it before, but I never saw this, but there was so much backlash from the public across the political spectrum that members of parliament dragged the CBC's former president and CEO, Catherine Tate, to committee many different times to explain the bonuses, right? And then so what happens? Well, okay, CBC brass comes up with this great idea. They're like, well, we think we know the solution to this problem. We are going to end the bonuses. Well, sort of. So they ended the bonuses, but then they turned around and jacked up salaries, right? Other records that the CTF got from the CBC shows that after canceling their taxpayer-funded bonuses, they handed out a record high of $38 million in pay raises. Right? More than offsetting the elimination of the bonuses. $38 million in pay raises, a record high in 2024. For comparison, they handed out $11.5 million in raises the year before in 2023. So, Chris, like, what do you make of all this? Swing away.
So, a few things here. So I would love to have been, well, not really, but it would have been interesting to have been a vase on the table at some of those meetings where somebody came up with this very cunning plan of, let's just take the label off the bucket of cash that says bonuses and replace it with the Sharpie that says pay raises. That'll trick them. Not so fast. And this is what gets me is that they think that people won't notice. They think that we can't notice a change between 11 million up into the 30s of millions in one year. Like, that's a huge change. Like, folks, this isn't that it was labeled bonuses. That isn't the issue. The issue is you guys are getting paid way too bloody much. Okay? Especially for a TV news network that has a 1.8% audience share. Okay? And what was interesting, exactly to your point, no, I hadn't ever seen the CBC CEO grilled like that. Like, never in my life. And it wasn't just at committee with all the different MPs from different parties. Again, I can't believe this happened, but Catherine Tate went on The National. Adrian Arsenault, okay, who started right in the field as a journalist, as a reporter, and who is now one of the anchors, was questioning her boss and quoting the Canadian Taxpayers Federation out loud with her face on TV. I thought I was asleep. I rolled over and saw it. I'm like, what is going on here? And Catherine Tate still wouldn't give her a straight answer, even though it was her own employee. So yeah, we never saw pushback like that before. They even had their little fan group. I forget what they're called. Friends of Canadian Broadcasting or something.
Friends of Canadian Media. Yeah.
There you go. Friends of Canadian Media. They're kind of a booster club for the CBC. Okay. They even went after the CBC, saying it was, unbecoming of a public broadcaster. Like, tut tut, you should not do that. And so that's why they would have had all these meetings. I'm so curious what those meetings are like, Franco, of like, take the label of bonuses off, quick, write it in as pay increases. It'd be like from Monty Python, but not as funny. But yeah, so that's what happened. And what needs to happen, though, is, okay, the CBC just needs to be defunded, okay? If people really love, watching the CBC, if they grew up watching Peter Mansbridge or listening to Peter Zosky or whatever, that's fine. Pay for it yourselves. Okay? Pay for it through subscriptions, get the CBC to do pledges and fundraising each year, okay? Make yourself kind of this lean, mean, interesting W5 sort of radio program, okay? The same direction that NPR is being made to go now. It can exist in that way journalistically and from an entertainment perspective. But right now, $1.4 billion per year from taxpayers with no accountability. This is what gets me, Franco. You mentioned the last CEO. Well, the new CEO, okay, they've got a new one. Her name is Marie-Philippe Bouchard. I always have to look it up to make sure I'm getting it right, okay? She's being paid at the same rate that Tate was. So they had a big opportunity, old CEO going. Let's, knock it down a bit. Let's have, the new CEO paid at a lower rate. No, she's still paid around $500,000 per year, $500,000. Which is more than any premier of any province in Canada. Isn't that more than the Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister is paid about $420,000. Yeah.
Yep. So this is more than the Prime Minister of the country, regardless of what you think of him. The head of CBC is making more money.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, they misunderstood the assignment, right? Like clearly, right? I mean, they didn't listen to Canadians. They didn't understand why people were so mad. They were just trying to avoid a bad press day. And look, I think you're completely right. I mean, the solution for taxpayers and honestly for the CBC is to take their taxpayer subsidy away completely. Okay, that would save taxpayers more than $1 billion every single year, but it would also force the CBC to actually be interesting. Yeah. To actually, make stuff that people want to watch rather than just rely on taxpayer handouts every single year. Now, I want to just switch very briefly. I want to talk about the bonuses going into other departments and crown corporations. Okay. Then we're going to get to our taxpayer pro tip. But I just want to point out that it's not just the CBC that is handing out these taxpayer funded bonuses, right? And I think that's an important thing to understand. Look, government departments and other crown corporations are handing out huge taxpayer-funded bonuses for failure. Okay, so I got some numbers in front of me here. The last year where records available is 2023. So in 2023, government departments paid out $211 million in bonuses 1 year. Crown corporations paid out $196 million in bonuses. Okay, so in 1 year, bonuses cost taxpayers about $400 million plus. Now, we also have data for federal departments going back to 2015. Federal departments have handed out $1.5 billion in bonuses since 2015. Now, the fundamental issue is the cost, of course. But the secondary issue, which is just as important, is that they're handing out bonuses with taxpayers' money for failure. Okay, because throughout this time, government departments can barely meet half of their own performance targets. Okay, it's like writing your own tests, getting a D-, and then giving yourself an $18,000 bonus. Job well done. Let me narrow in on three really egregious examples of bonuses. Okay, everyone remembers Arrive Scam, right? Everyone remembers that app. It became a national scandal when its price tag ballooned from 80 grand to $60 million. I don't even know how that's possible. 80 grand to $60 million. The government executives working on that app, ArriveCan, took $340,000 in bonuses. Okay. Another crown corporation, the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation, dished out $132 million in bonuses since the beginning of 2020, despite the fact that many, if not most, working Canadians can't afford a home. The Bank of Canada. Oh, my favorite crown corporation, the Bank of Canada. I'm joking, folks. I don't know if you can hear the sarcasm.
No, I can hear it.
The Bank of Canada handed out $20 million in bonuses in 2022 when inflation reached a 40-year high. Okay, so the CMHC has repeatedly claimed that it's driven by one goal: housing affordability for all. The Bank of Canada's one job is to keep inflation low and around 2%. In both instances, those crown corporations clearly failed and yet handed out big-time taxpayer-funded bonuses.
Yeah. And this has real consequences for real people who are taxpayers and they're being failed by their government. The three examples you give are so important because it directly affects normal people. I want people to envision what Franco just said there. How did that inflation, okay, with those interest rates being cranked up along with the inflation, affect you? Okay? You probably really noticed it at the grocery store. The next time you tried to repair something on your house, if you're lucky enough to own one, you were probably shocked by how much the supply cost had gone up. If you were trying to save up for a house, you suddenly watched that house just fly away from you, that you couldn't afford it anymore. Like, these crown corporations, to Franco's point exactly, supposedly exist to do one thing: to keep housing affordable, to keep inflation low. They failed in spectacular fashion and still gave themselves bonuses at your expense. I will also point out, you go back to 2015, but I find especially the years between 2020 and 2023 were brutal for a lot of normal working people. We talk to thousands of people every year, Franco, you and I, and we hear from normal working people all the time. I remember speaking specifically to a couple in Red Deer, Franco, that were so scared about the cost of housing that they were making a very modest income, renovating houses so that families could live in them. This couple lived in a garage because they were so scared of renting a decent home for themselves, that they were going to get nailed through taxes. But yet the CMHC is giving themselves bonuses. Like, people should be absolutely livid at this. So I always, the thing came out here with the Fraser Institute, right? The 42% of your income, families on average, is eaten up by various levels of taxation from government. And you always ask the great question, Franco: what services are you getting in return for this money? What kind of great services? And your point about the Bank of Canada and CMHC, I don't know, it's upsetting because it really hits home. And I don't see improvement. Like, okay, let's end on a happy note. Like, do you think that if we keep the pressure up long enough and hard enough, that these bureaucrats and that Carney will get the message and they will actually trim down the size of the bureaucracy, get rid of the bonuses, roll back wages? Like, I'm talking some serious cuts here.
Yeah, it's always tough to know exactly what's going to happen. The reason I know that it is possible is just the carbon tax, right? Like, we've been fighting the carbon tax for more than a decade. You go back a decade ago, and really the only two organizations fighting the carbon tax was Brad Wall and his Saskatchewan government and the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, right? I even remember after the 2021 federal election when there was that other guy who was leading the Conservative Party. I forget what his name is. I don't know. Can you remember, Chris? Yeah,
no,
I don't know.
It escapes me.
But anyways, he ran on a carbon tax during the 2021 election. And after that election, there was an opinion piece in the Globe and Mail, and I'm just paraphrasing, that essentially said, like, the fight against carbon taxes is over. The carbon tax is here to stay. And that was as soon as 2021.
Yeah.
Right. And then what happened in a short period of time is, like, Canadians got fed up. Canadians pushed back, and Canadians force the Liberal government to end its own consumer carbon tax. Now, I know the fight against carbon taxes is not over. We talk about this all the time, but that's like a huge proof point that, like, even though things might seem hopeless and out of reach and unaccountable, like, if there is organized pressure that just keeps banging away, yeah, we can definitely get good policy wins.
Yeah, we can. And I can't remember the old adage, everything's fine until it's suddenly not. Okay, yeah. That's how politicians usually operate. It's like a duck, okay? Up above the surface, they look like everything's fine. They're unruffled. Nothing to see here, folks. Carbon tax is awesome. Carbon tax fight is over. It's here to stay. Under the surface, they're paddling like crazy because they're freaking out, because they're getting emails from normal people all the time, and the media is starting to actually do their jobs and ask tough questions about things like affordability. And then all of a sudden, you see a Liberal member of Parliament standing at a gas station, nozzle in hand, saying, "We just scrapped the carbon tax and saved you $15 per minivan." It's amazing, people. It's amazing. But the point that Franco is making here is great and true. Like he said, we know the carbon tax is going to come back up like a zombie at some point, but on average, you walk by a gas station right now, it's about 20 cents cheaper. 20 cents cheaper per liter on average than it was last summer. That's some serious savings, and it is a good example that it's possible to cut the size of government. I really hope it happens because people are really strapped right now.
Okay, agreed. Here. I want to let's go into our taxpayer pro tip. I'll go first, and you go. Okay, so look, I just want to give a hat tip to Blacklock's, the online news site. They're always doing great investigative journalism. Letting people know how their money is being wasted by these crazy politicians. And a story that came by my desk again from Blacklock's reporter. Shout out to them. Frig. It just drives me nuts because the story was that 22 Canadian diplomats were fired last year for fraud, theft, embezzlement, soliciting kickbacks, and other wrongdoing, according to Department of Foreign Affairs. Right. And Blacklock's is essentially just going through the Department of Foreign Affairs' own report. And, there's these allegations or instances of soliciting kickbacks, falsifying receipts to claim allowances, misusing government-issued fuel cards, falsifying travel expenses. And then that eventually led to 22 Canadian diplomats that were fired. Now, again, hat tip to Blacklock's for always doing this hard work. But, my question is this. Why aren't other bureaucrats getting fired? Right? Like, why aren't other bureaucrats getting fired, especially at Global Affairs? Because, look, who decided and who approved spending $8,800 on a sex toy show in Germany? Why isn't that bureaucrat fired? Yes. Okay. Who approved the fact that Global Affairs spent 12 grand so seniors in other countries could talk about their sex lives in front of live audiences? Why isn't that bureaucrat not fired? Okay. Or what about the bureaucrat at Global Affairs that's spending $51,000 a month on booze? Who's overseeing that decision, and why aren't they being fired? Okay, so hat tip to Blacklock's for breaking this story and all the great investigative journalism that they're doing. But the other part is, hey, there's a lot of other bureaucrats that actually have to be held accountable for wasting other people's money. This is thousands of dollars taken from Canadians' pockets. And it's not okay that the government is wasting like this. And yes, bureaucrats need to be fired when they make these bad decisions and waste thousands of dollars that doesn't belong to them.
Amen.
The final part of this pro tip, Chris, is especially opposition members of parliament, because obviously they're not in the government, they should be pushing for a full investigation into Global Affairs, because they perhaps are the biggest waste offender in the entire government, which is saying a lot. So open up the books, go line by line, and keep pushing on this.
Excellent. Absolutely outstanding point. And I echo what you're saying about Blacklock's. My taxpayer pro tip kind of dovetails with that. And it's going out to our listeners and our viewers. We talk to you guys every single week. We phone you. We get emails back and forth. It's really wonderful. Okay. It's a true grassroots friendship and relationship. And it goes back both ways. I often hear from them because I ask everybody, where do you get your news from? And I actually hear from them quite often, you guys. I watch YouTube. I watch you guys on YouTube. So this is just a point to them who are listening right now. Do yourself a favor and expand your network a little bit. Okay, it's super important you're watching our show, but the way that we win is that we're this movement, okay, that becomes unstoppable. And sometimes other outlets will be able to cover things more thoroughly than we do. So, for example, go sign up for the emails that come from the Canadian Constitution Foundation, okay? They do great legal work that is different and outside of our ballpark, but they do great legal work standing up for your rights on things like freedom of expression. Because if you can't express yourself freely in Canada, you can't hold the government to account, okay? We wouldn't be able to do our little trophy show with Porky the Waste Hater if we couldn't properly express ourselves freely in Canada. So make sure that when you see us on other shows, go follow them, okay? Expand your network and then share it with friends who you think need to actually be with the program and understand what we're up against here. So the taxpayer pro tip goes out to the listeners and viewers. Find out who else is in the, smaller government movement, more accountability movement. follow their stuff, share their stuff. Same goes for Blacklock's reporter. They don't take money from the government. They're true investigative journalists. They're definitely worth the money. Go get a subscription at them. Franco, thank you so much for covering this. I'm going to let you land the plane because you started. You took off.
Yeah, just the instinct just comes right back, doesn't it? Yeah, I was like, I wonder if Chris is going to land this thing here.
I almost did.
No. Hey, Chris, just want to say thanks for coming on the show. To our listeners, our supporters, thank you very much. The entire Canadian Taxpayers Federation team appreciates it. And guess what, folks? If your blood is boiling, as is mine, here's a good outlet. Go over to taxpayer.com, sign a fantastic petition to defund the CBC.